You know that feeling, right? You're standing there, maybe in front of the fridge, and you know exactly what you're supposed to do. But there's this other, almost magnetic pull toward what you want to do. It's this daily battle, a constant tug of war playing out right inside our own minds. Oscar Wilde absolutely nailed it more than a century ago. This isn't some new, modern problem. It's a fundamental core part of being human. We are, all of us, constantly trying to navigate this minefield of temptation. And this is the perfect example, one that researchers actually use. You've got one voice in your head, the reasonable one, saying, hey, fruit salad. But then there's this other, much more primal voice that's just screaming for that rich, decadent chocolate mousse. The real question is, why is that second voice so often so much louder? Okay, so let's really get into it. Here's the game plan for this explainer. First, we're going to unpack that daily tug of war by looking at the two competing systems in your brain. Then, we'll see how this is actually an age-old conflict that people have been talking about forever. After that, we'll dig into the science of when impulse usually wins. And finally, we'll touch on how you can start to master your own mind. So, that feeling of being torn in two, it's not just a figure of speech. It's literally the sound of two completely different operating systems running at the exact same time inside the same brain. To get a handle on this, we're going to lean on a really powerful framework from two psychologists, Fritz Strack and Roland Deutsch. It's called the Reflective Impulsive Model, or RIM for short. And it just brilliantly frames our behavior as the result of a constant competition between these two mental systems. And I love this analogy. Think of it as your autopilot versus your pilot. The impulsive system, that's your autopilot. It is fast, it's automatic, it's emotionally hot. It just runs on pure feeling and association. It sees the moose and its only thought is, yes, pleasure. And the best part? It needs basically zero mental energy. But then you've got the reflective system. That's your pilot. It's slow, it's deliberate, it's cool and logical. It uses your values and your long-term goals. It's the voice calmly saying, the fruit salad really aligns with my health goals. But, and this is the huge catch, the pilot runs on a finite battery. It needs mental energy, these control resources, to even function. And what's so fascinating is that while Strack and Deutsch gave us this modern scientific language, humanity has been trying to put a name to this exact same internal battle for millennia. Just look at this timeline. The labels change, but the core idea, it stays exactly the same. Way back in ancient Greece, Plato and Aristotle called it the struggle between passion and reason. Fast forward a bit, St. Augustine saw it as a spiritual fight between the carnal will and the spiritual will. Then you get to the early days of psychology, you've got William James talking about impulsive forces versus ideal motives. And of course, there's Sigmund Freud, who famously framed it as the battle between the pleasure-seeking id and the moral superego. Different times, different words, same exact tug of war. Okay, so this all leads us back to the million-dollar question. Who actually wins this tug of war and why? Well, modern psychology has some surprisingly clear answers for us. A really groundbreaking idea comes from psychologist Roy Baumeister. He proposed that our willpower, the fuel for our logical pilot, it works just like a muscle. You can use it, for sure, but it gets tired. And he gave this state of mental fatigue a name, ego depletion. Every single time you say no to a donut or force yourself to focus on a boring task, you're basically doing a rep, and that muscle gets just a little bit more tired. So what are the things that just absolutely drain this willpower muscle? The research calls them boundary conditions, a fancy way of saying they weaken your pilot. Things like ego depletion from all the choices you already made today, or the cognitive load of trying to multitask. But also things like alcohol consumption, being emotionally upset, or even just feeling rushed by time pressure. All of these things sap the very energy your pilot needs to stay in control. And this chart from a 2007 study by Hoffman, Rausch, and Goransky just spells it all out perfectly. What they found was pretty amazing. When people had a high willpower, when their mental muscle was fresh, their behavior was guided by their long-term goals. So if they were dieting, they ate less candy. Simple. But when their willpower was low, when they were experiencing that ego depletion, suddenly their behavior was driven by their automatic impulses. Their dieting goals just went right out the window. The pilot was too tired, so the autopilot grabbed the controls. And we can actually see this pattern in the brain itself. A 2016 study by researchers Fries, Giannotti, and Nock found a physical reason for this. Turns out people with lower baseline activity in a very specific part of the brain, the right lateral prefrontal cortex, which is basically the brain's executive control center, these people were way more likely to act on their automatic impulses. It suggests that some of us might even have a neurological predisposition for a weaker pilot from the get-go. Now, the reflective impulsive model isn't the only theory out there. Other key models really add some nuance to our understanding. For instance, Isaac Agen's theory of planned behavior looks at how we deliberately form our intentions. And I find Russell Fazio's mode model super interesting. It basically says we only bother to fire up our slow, effortful pilot system when we have both the motivation and the opportunity to do so. If we don't have both, we just default to the easy automatic autopilot. All right, so we've been pretty deep in the theory and the science, but what does all this actually mean for us? How does this help in that daily battle with the chocolate mousse? Let's just boil it all down to the most crucial points. First, this internal battle is real, it's universal, and science backs it up. Second, your willpower is not infinite. It's a limited resource that gets used up. Third, when that resource is running low, your fast, automatic autopilot is way more likely to win that tug of war. And finally, our very own brain wiring can make some of us naturally more susceptible to the pull of impulse than others.
And all of that leaves us with one last really big thought. If our willpower is this fragile, this easily drained muscle, then is the key to self-control really about gritting our teeth and trying to build a stronger will? Or is it actually about developing smarter strategies? Like maybe not keeping the chocolate mousse in the house in the first place so we never even have to fight a battle that we're destined to lose when we're tired. Something to think about.